My 6-year-old son said something strange on a hike. By the next week, I was fighting to save him from a predator in disguise. My wife abandoned me and my 6-year-old son Thomas when she passed away in a tragic car accident. Life was hard, but through counseling and parenting books, I think I'm a pretty good single dad, except for one blind spot: emotions. You see, my dad always raised me as an emotional statue, meaning showing anything other than strict stoicism was completely unacceptable. Obviously, I didn't want Thomas to live this way, so I always tried my best to encourage him to express his emotions. Whenever Thomas cried during emotional scenes in movies, I'd think about my dad wailing on me for being a wuss. Instead, I'd put my arm around him and say, "It's okay to cry." That part made me sad too. Or when he'd get angry and do something like slam a door, I would pull him into my room a few minutes later and say, "Anger's a big feeling. Let's talk about what made you feel like that." But it was still something I really struggled with, so most of the time I ended up calling my sister Jessica to tell me what to do. One day I noticed Thomas becoming a lot quieter and wetting the bed almost every night. I had Jessica come over. Usually she helps Thomas take a bath, and that's when he opens up to her about what's going on, but this time he didn't say anything. In fact, he started crying and shouting at her to leave him alone. I figured he was just missing his mom or something. I wasn't ready for how wrong I'd been. We were on a walk one day at around 8 o'clock in the evening on his favorite hiking trail, with his favorite snacks and his favorite toy. The trail was completely empty, and we spotted a male and female deer prancing together. I pointed out how cute they were, and that's when Thomas turned to me. "Dad, I have something to tell you," he said. His hands wouldn't sit still, and he couldn't even make eye contact with me. "Dad, I think I'm gay." I stared at him blankly while my brain went into overdrive. For context, he was 6 years old. If he was 12 or older, I would have 100% accepted him and been completely fine with it. But at 6, you barely even know how to spell the word animal, let alone know who you're attracted to, girl or boy. Alarm bells were going off in my head, so I just changed the topic and pretended like it was a completely normal thing to say. But as soon as we got home, I called Jessica. Luckily, she seemed even more freaked out than me. She told me it could simply be because of something he saw on TV, or something much more disturbing. The next day, we decided to tag team him. We sat him down on the couch, put a bowl of popcorn in the center of the table, and started playing his favorite movie, Cars 2. While he was distracted, I asked him why he thought he might be gay. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe the name of a movie he watched, maybe he'd say he learned it from a show he saw, but no. "Mr. Wilson said I am because of what we do together," he said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. A sick feeling settled just beneath my ribs. "What is it that you guys do together?" Jessica asked with a fake casual tone. "Oh, he calls it adult stuff. It's like hugs, but with no clothes." Jessica's hand gripped the arm of the couch so tight I thought it might snap. "And he says if I tell anyone it means I hate him, but I don't. He's just nice in a weird way." My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I stared at my son, who had a huge smile on his face, blissfully unaware of the trauma he'd have to process. The next morning, Jessica agreed to babysit him while I made a beeline to the principal's office. My voice was cold and stern. "Your son shouldn't flatter himself just because Mr. Wilson is a very handsome man," was his response when I told him what had happened. He then proceeded to laugh like it was the funniest thing in the world. When he realized I wasn't going to laugh along, his face went completely serious. "Well, I'll look into it, but I'm not ruining a teacher's life over some silly claim from a 6-year-old. By then, I was done. I had given the school a chance to deal with it, and they didn't want to take it. I would do whatever it took to avenge my family. That night, after Thomas was asleep, Jessica and I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. We were researching everything we could about reporting suspected child abuse, the police, Child Protective Services, the school board. We were going to contact them all, but first, we needed more information from Thomas. The next day was Saturday, so I took Thomas to the park. While he was playing on the swings, his laughter carrying across the playground as he pumped his legs to go higher, I casually asked him how long he'd been doing adult stuff with Mr. Wilson. His answer made my heart sink. "Since after Christmas," he said. That was almost 4 months ago. I asked where it happened, and he told me it was always in the art supply closet during recess when he was supposed to be helping Mr. Wilson organize supplies. No one ever checked on them because Mr. Wilson was a trusted teacher. By Monday morning, I had a plan. I called in sick to work and dropped Thomas off at school as usual, but instead of leaving, I parked across the street and waited. At recess time, I walked into the school, told the front office I was dropping off Thomas's forgotten lunch, and headed straight for Mr. Wilson's classroom. My heart was pounding in my chest. The room was empty since all the kids were at recess, but I could see light coming from under the supply closet door at the back of the room. I moved quietly, my footsteps muffled by the colorful alphabet carpet. As I got closer, I heard voices, a man's low murmur and what sounded like Thomas's small, uncertain responses. I don't really remember consciously deciding to kick the door open. One second I was walking, the next, I was standing in the doorway of the supply closet, staring at Mr. Wilson kneeling in front of my son. They were both fully clothed, thank God, but Mr. Wilson had his hands on Thomas's shoulders in a way that made my skin crawl. Thomas looked up at me with wide, confused eyes. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Mr. Wilson stood up quickly, smoothing down his button-up shirt. He was younger than me, maybe early 30s, with the kind of friendly face you'd trust immediately. That made it worse somehow. "Mr. Parker, what a surprise," he said, smiling like we were meeting at a PTA event. "Thomas was just helping me organize some supplies for our art project this afternoon." I looked at Thomas, who was clutching a box of markers. "Thomas, go wait in the hallway for a minute, okay, buddy?" Once Thomas was out of earshot, I turned to Mr. Wilson. I told him I knew what he'd been doing with my son. The smile dropped from his face, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I don't know what you think you know, but Thomas has an active imagination. Kids say all sorts of things. I wanted to punch him. I really did. My fists were clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. But I thought about Thomas waiting in the hallway, and I knew getting arrested for assault wouldn't help him. So instead, I pulled out my phone and showed Mr. Wilson that I'd been recording since I walked into the classroom. "I have enough to go to the police," I said, which wasn't entirely true. The recording didn't capture anything incriminating, but he didn't know that. His face changed again, panic flashing in his eyes before settling into something harder. "No one will believe him. I'm a respected teacher with 20 years of experience. He's a confused little boy who lost his mother. Who do you think people will side with?" That's when I realized this wasn't going to be as straightforward as I'd hoped. I grabbed Thomas and left, calling Jessica from the car to tell her what happened. She suggested we take Thomas to the pediatrician right away to document anything that might help our case. I agreed and drove straight there, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Dr. Morgan had been Thomas's doctor since he was born. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with salt and pepper hair always pulled back in a tight bun. When I explained the situation, her face grew serious. She asked if she could speak with Thomas alone, and though it killed me to leave him, I agreed. 30 minutes later, Dr. Morgan called me back in. She didn't say much in front of Thomas, but the look she gave me said everything. After scheduling a follow-up appointment, she asked me to step into the hallway while her nurse gave Thomas a sticker. "There are no physical signs of abuse," she said quietly. "But based on what Thomas told me, I'm legally obligated to report this to Child Protective Services. They'll want to interview him and probably you as well." I nodded, relief and dread mixing in my stomach. At least the process was starting. "Doctor," Morgan put a hand on my shoulder and told me I'd done the right thing bringing him in. It was the first time since this nightmare began that I felt like maybe, just maybe, things would work out. That feeling didn't last long. The next morning I got a call from the school. It was Dr. Reynolds, asking me to come in for a meeting. When I arrived, Mr. Wilson was sitting in his office, along with a woman who introduced herself as the school district's attorney. "Mr. Parker," Dr. Reynolds said, his bow tie looking particularly tight around his neck today. "Mr. Wilson has informed us of your accusations. We need to discuss how to proceed while respecting everyone's rights in this situation." The attorney explained that Mr. Wilson had been placed on administrative leave with pay while the investigation proceeded, which was standard protocol. She emphasized that this wasn't an admission of guilt but a procedural safeguard. She also mentioned that they were cooperating fully with CPS and the police investigation that Dr. Morgan had initiated. While not as immediately satisfying as seeing Wilson in handcuffs, I recognized they were following proper legal procedures. I left the office feeling cautiously optimistic that the system was at least working as it should, but that optimism was tested when I picked up Thomas from Jessica's that evening. He was quiet, withdrawn again. When I asked what was wrong, he burst into tears. "Mr. Wilson said I'm in big trouble," he sobbed. "He said I told a lie, and now he's going to lose his job, and it's all my fault. He said they might take me away from you because you made me lie." I held Thomas while he cried, rage building inside me. That bastard had gotten to him during school hours despite everything. I called Jessica again that night after Thomas was asleep, and we agreed he wasn't going back to that school, not ever. The next few days were a blur of meetings with CPS, with the police, with a child psychologist named Dr. Barbara, who specialized in abuse cases. Thomas seemed to like her, opening up more in their sessions than he had with anyone else. She recommended keeping him home from school until things were resolved, which aligned perfectly with my plans. About a week after I'd confronted Mr. Wilson, a detective named Detective Ree called to tell me they were investigating, but didn't have enough evidence yet to arrest Mr. Wilson. They needed to build a solid case that would stand up in court, especially since Mr. Wilson had no prior complaints against him. I hung up feeling frustrated but understood the importance of doing things properly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Mr. Wilson had said, that no one would believe Thomas. What if he was right? What if he got away with it and went on to hurt other kids? The thought made me sick. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke up to my phone ringing at 6 o'clock in the morning. It was Jessica, her voice urgent. "Turn on Channel 7 News now." I fumbled for the remote and switched on the TV. There was Mr. Wilson's face on the screen next to a headline, "Elementary teacher accused of inappropriate conduct with students." Students, plural. According to the news report, after hearing about Thomas's allegations, 2 other families had come forward with similar stories about their children. The reporter mentioned that Mr. Wilson had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. I called Detective Ree immediately. He confirmed that 2 more families had filed reports, and they were now taking the case much more seriously. He asked if Thomas would be willing to talk to them again to provide more details that might help build their case. I agreed, but only if Dr. Barbara could be present. The detective set up the interview for that afternoon at their office, which had a special room designed for interviewing children. Jessica came with us for moral support, sitting with me in the waiting room, while Thomas talked to the detective and Dr. Barbara. After about an hour, they came out. Dr. Barbara gave me a thumbs up behind Thomas's back, which I took as a good sign. Detective Ree asked to speak with me privately, while Jessica took Thomas to get ice cream in the cafeteria. "Your son did great," he said once we were alone. He provided some details that match exactly what the other children described, details that weren't public knowledge. That kind of corroboration is gold in cases like this. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. They believed him. They were going to do something about it, but my relief was short-lived. The next day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Mr. Wilson. "You're ruining my life," he said, his voice eerily calm. "I hope you're prepared for what comes next." I hung up and called Detective Ree right away. He told me to document the call and block the number, but not to worry too much. People like Wilson often make threats when they feel cornered. It's usually just hot air. I wasn't so sure. That night, I double-checked all the locks before going to bed. I even put a chair under my doorknob, feeling slightly ridiculous but too anxious not to take precautions. The next morning, I woke up to find my car vandalized. Someone had keyed the word liar across both sides and slashed my tires. I called the police, who came and took photos, but they couldn't prove it was Mr. Wilson. No cameras in my apartment complex parking lot, no witnesses. I was starting to feel like I was in over my head. I called my boss and explained I needed more time off. Thankfully, she was understanding, especially after I explained the situation. I also called the school district to formally withdraw Thomas and request his records be transferred to the homeschool program I'd hastily signed up for. That's when things got really concerning. The school secretary sounded confused when I called. "I'll need to verify your identity before releasing any records," she explained. "We've had a security incident recently." When I pressed for details, she explained that someone claiming to be me had called the previous day, requesting Thomas's records be emailed to them. Fortunately, the secretary had followed proper protocol and refused, explaining that records could only be released in person with proper identification. My blood ran cold. I thanked her for her diligence and told her I'd come in person with my ID. I hung up and immediately called Detective Ree again. This time, he took it more seriously. "He's escalating," he said. "We'll try to get a restraining order, but in the meantime, you might want to stay somewhere else." Jessica offered her place without hesitation. She had a spare bedroom that Thomas could use, and her apartment complex had better security than mine. We packed up some essentials and headed over that evening. For a few days, things were quiet. Thomas seemed to be doing better away from the stress of our apartment. He was sleeping through the night again, no more bedwetting. Barbara continued her sessions with him, now at Jessica's place, and reported that he was making progress processing what had happened. Then the emails started, first to me, then to Jessica, then somehow to Dr. Barbara, all from different anonymous accounts, all with the same message: drop the charges or else. We forwarded them all to Detective Ree, who added them to the growing file against Mr. Wilson. About 2 weeks after we'd moved to Jessica's, I got a call from the detective. They'd arrested Mr. Wilson that morning. One of the other families had installed a nanny cam in their child's backpack after hearing about our case, and they'd caught Mr. Wilson on video trying to get their child alone in the supply closet again, despite being on administrative leave and banned from campus. I should have felt relieved, but something still felt off. That night, after putting Thomas to bed, I checked all the locks again out of habit. That's when I noticed a small piece of paper that had been slipped under Jessica's front door. It was a photo of Thomas playing at the park near Jessica's apartment. It had been taken that day. I recognized the shirt he was wearing. On the back, someone had written, "I have friends who owe me favors. This isn't over." I showed it to Jessica, who immediately called the police. They sent an officer over, who took the photo as evidence, and did a sweep of the building and surrounding area. They didn't find anything suspicious but suggested we be extra vigilant. The next day, I took Thomas to his therapy session with Dr. Barbara while Jessica went grocery shopping. When we got back to her apartment, something felt wrong. The door was slightly ajar, though I distinctly remembered Jessica saying she'd be gone for at least 2 hours. I told Thomas to wait in the hallway and cautiously pushed the door open. The apartment had been ransacked, drawers pulled out, furniture overturned, Thomas's drawings torn from the refrigerator and shredded on the floor. But worst of all, spray painted across the living room wall were the words, "Liars get what they deserve." I grabbed Thomas and ran to the neighbor's apartment, pounding on the door until Mrs. Riley, a retired teacher who'd always been kind to us, opened up. I asked her to watch Thomas while I called the police, and she agreed without hesitation. The police arrived quickly this time, along with Detective Ree. They took photos, dusted for prints, and interviewed me about who might have done this. I showed them the note from the night before, and Detective Ree's face grew serious. "Mr. Wilson was released on bail this morning," he said. "The judge set it high considering the charges, but his parents posted it. We'll try to track him down, but in the meantime, you need a safer place to stay." That's when Jessica arrived home, dropping her grocery bags in shock when she saw the police cars. After explaining what happened, she suggested we go to our parents' old cabin, about 2 hours outside the city. It was remote, hard to find if you didn't know it was there, and had been sitting empty since our dad passed away the previous year. We packed up again, this time taking everything we might need for an extended stay. Detective Ree promised to call with any updates and gave me his personal cell number in case of emergency. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it, rustic, a bit dusty, but solid. It sat on about 5 acres of wooded land, with the nearest neighbor a mile down the dirt road. Thomas was excited about the adventure of it all, running around exploring while Jessica and I tried to clean up enough to make it livable. That night, after Thomas was asleep in the small bedroom that used to be mine as a kid, Jessica and I sat on the porch with cups of coffee, watching the stars. "Do you think he'll find us here?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. No one knows about this place except family, and even if they did, it's not in my name or yours. Dad never got around to transferring the deed after Mom died. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the past few weeks settling over us. Finally, Jessica spoke again. "You're doing the right thing, standing up for Thomas like this. Not every parent would. I thought about my own father, how he would have handled this situation. He probably would have told Thomas to toughen up, to forget about it and move on. The thought made me sick. I'm just trying to be the dad he deserves," I said. We stayed at the cabin for nearly a week, settling into a routine of homeschool lessons in the morning, exploring the woods in the afternoon, and board games by the fireplace at night. Thomas seemed happier than he had in months, away from the stress and confusion of everything that had happened. Detective Ree called every day with updates. They'd searched Mr. Wilson's apartment and found disturbing evidence, photos of several students, including Thomas, and journals detailing his special relationships with them. The case against him was growing stronger by the day. I was starting to think maybe we could go back soon, start rebuilding our normal life, when everything went to hell again. It was a Tuesday evening. Jessica had driven into the nearest town for supplies, and Thomas and I were playing Monopoly on the living room floor. I heard a car coming up the dirt driveway, which was unusual. Jessica shouldn't be back for at least another hour, and we weren't expecting anyone else. I looked out the window and felt my heart stop. It was Mr. Wilson's blue Honda, the same one I'd seen him driving at school pickup. "Thomas," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I need you to go to the bedroom and hide under the bed. Don't come out until I come get you, okay?" Thomas looked confused but did as I asked. Once he was safely in the bedroom, I grabbed my dad's old baseball bat from the closet and positioned myself by the front door. I could hear footsteps on the porch now, then a knock. "I know you're in there, Parker," Mr. Wilson called through the door. "We need to talk." I didn't respond, hoping he'd think no one was home and leave. But then I heard something that made my blood run cold, the sound of the back door handle turning. I'd forgotten to lock it after bringing in firewood earlier. I ran to the kitchen just as Mr. Wilson was stepping inside. He looked different than he had at school, disheveled, wild-eyed, with several days' worth of stubble on his face. "Where is he?" Mr. Wilson demanded, looking around frantically. "Where's Thomas?" I raised the bat. "You need to leave now. The police are on their way." It was a bluff. My phone was in the living room, and I hadn't had time to call anyone. Mr. Wilson laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the small kitchen. "No, they're not. No one knows I'm here. I followed your sister to town last time she went for groceries, then followed her back here. No one knows where you are except me." He took a step toward me, and I tightened my grip on the bat. "I just want to talk to Thomas, to explain things to him. He misunderstands what happened between us. There's nothing to misunderstand. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You hurt my son, you manipulated him, and now you're going to jail for it. Something in Mr. Wilson's eyes changed, hardened. Not if there's no one to testify against me. He lunged at me then, faster than I expected. We crashed into the kitchen table, sending chairs flying. The bat clattered to the floor as we struggled. He was stronger than he looked, fueled by desperation and whatever twisted obsession had brought him here. I managed to knee him in the stomach, giving me just enough space to scramble for the bat, but as my fingers closed around it, I felt a sharp pain in my side. Mr. Wilson had grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter and slashed at me. I swung the bat blindly, connecting with something solid. Mr. Wilson grunted in pain but didn't go down. Instead, he came at me again with the knife. I dodged, feeling it slice through my shirt but miss my skin. We circled each other in the small kitchen, both breathing hard. I could feel blood soaking my shirt from the first cut, but adrenaline kept the pain at bay. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Mr. Wilson said, his voice eerily calm again. Just let me see Thomas one more time to say goodbye. Never, I spat, raising the bat again. That's when I heard it, the sound of a car engine coming up the driveway. Jessica was back early. Mr. Wilson heard it too, his head whipping toward the window. I took advantage of his distraction and swung the bat with everything I had, connecting solidly with his shoulder. He screamed in pain, the knife clattering to the floor. I kicked it away and hit him again, this time in the knee. He went down hard, clutching his leg. Jessica burst through the front door, took one look at the scene, and immediately pulled out her phone to call 911. Mr. Wilson tried to get up, but I placed my foot firmly on his chest, keeping him pinned to the floor. It's over, I told him, feeling a strange calm wash over me despite the blood still seeping from my side. You're never going to hurt another child again. The police showed up about 15 minutes later. Turns out, the nearest station was farther away than I thought. By then, Jessica had helped me bandage my side with a kitchen towel while keeping an eye on Mr. Wilson. He'd stopped struggling and just lay there on the kitchen floor, staring at the ceiling with this weird, empty look. I kept the bat in my hands the whole time, not trusting him to stay down. When the cops finally arrived, they cuffed Mr. Wilson and read him his rights. One of the officers, a guy named Officer James, took my statement while his partner dealt with Wilson. I told him everything, from Thomas's first confession to the break-in at Jessica's apartment to Wilson showing up at the cabin. Jessica filled in the parts I missed. You should get that looked at, Officer James said, nodding at my side where blood was starting to seep through the makeshift bandage. I nodded, but honestly, I was more worried about Thomas. He was still hiding in the bedroom where I told him to go. I asked if I could get him, and Officer James came with me, probably to make sure I didn't collapse from blood loss on the way. I found Thomas exactly where I told him to hide, under the bed, clutching his dinosaur toy so tight his knuckles were white. When he saw me, he scrambled out and threw himself into my arms, nearly knocking me over. Dad, you're bleeding, he cried, his eyes wide with fear. It's just a scratch, buddy, I lied, trying not to wince as his small body pressed against my wound. The police are here now. Mr. Wilson can't hurt us anymore. Thomas looked up at Officer James, who gave him a reassuring smile. Your dad's right. The bad guy is going to jail for a long time. We went back to the living room, careful to avoid the kitchen where they were still dealing with Wilson. An ambulance arrived a few minutes later, and the paramedics insisted on taking me to the hospital to get stitches. Jessica promised to bring Thomas and meet me there. The ride to the hospital was a blur. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the pain in my side was getting worse. The paramedic, a woman named Jennifer, kept asking me questions to keep me alert, my name, the date, who the president was, basic stuff. I must have answered okay because she seemed satisfied. At the hospital, they took me straight to an exam room. The doctor, Dr. Thompson, cleaned and stitched up my wound, 12 stitches in total. He said I was lucky the knife hadn't hit anything important, just sliced through some muscle. I'd be sore for a while, but would heal fine. Jessica and Thomas showed up just as they were finishing. Thomas's eyes got huge when he saw the bandages, but I assured him I was okay. The hospital wanted to keep me overnight for observation, which I wasn't thrilled about, but Jessica promised to take Thomas back to the cabin and bring him to visit first thing in the morning. I must have dozed off after they left because the next thing I knew, Detective Ree was standing by my bed. It was dark outside the window, probably late evening. Heard you had quite the encounter, he said, pulling up a chair next to the bed. I tried to sit up, wincing at the pull in my side. What's happening with Wilson? Is he in custody? Ree nodded. He's being processed as we speak. No bail this time. The judge made sure of that after he violated the conditions of his previous release. Relief washed over me. So what happens now? Now we build our case, Ree said. With the evidence from his apartment, the testimony from the children, and now the assault on you. He's looking at serious time. Ree leaned forward, his expression serious. "But I need to ask, are you and Thomas still willing to testify? It would really strengthen the case. I didn't even have to think about it." "Absolutely. Whatever it takes to make sure he never hurts another kid." Ree seemed satisfied with that. He left me his card with his cell number written on the back and told me to call if I needed anything or remembered any other details. The next morning, Jessica brought Thomas to visit as promised. He seemed better, more like his old self. He'd brought me a drawing he'd made, a stick figure with a cape labeled Dad standing over another stick figure labeled Bad Guy. It was the best thing I'd ever seen. I told him we'd frame it when we got home. The doctor discharged me that afternoon with instructions to take it easy and a prescription for pain meds. Jessica drove us back to the cabin, where we decided to stay for a few more days until things settled down. Over the next week, we fell into a new routine. Mornings were for homeschool lessons, afternoons for short walks in the woods as much as my injury would allow, and evenings for board games and movies. Thomas seemed to be healing both from Wilson's abuse and from the trauma of the attack at the cabin. He still had nightmares sometimes, but they were getting less frequent. Detective Ree called regularly with updates the prosecutor was building a strong case against Wilson. 2 more families had come forward after hearing about his arrest, bringing the total to 5 children, including Thomas. The school board was conducting its own investigation into how Wilson had been able to abuse children for so long without anyone noticing. About 2 weeks after the attack, we finally went back to our apartment. It felt strange walking in after being away for so long, like we were returning to a different life. I immediately started looking for a new place. Too many bad memories in this one. Thomas continued his sessions with Dr. Barbara, who said he was making remarkable progress. She recommended a support group for parents of abused children, which I reluctantly joined. Turns out talking to other parents going through similar situations actually helped. Who knew? The preliminary hearing for Wilson's case was scheduled for a month after the attack. I was nervous about seeing him again, about Thomas having to see him, but Dr. Barbara worked with both of us to prepare. She explained exactly what would happen, who would be there, and what kinds of questions might be asked. The day of the hearing arrived faster than I expected. I put on my one good suit, helped Thomas with his tie, he insisted on wearing one to look serious for the judge, and met Jessica at the courthouse. Detective Ree was waiting for us in the lobby, along with the prosecutor, a sharp-looking woman named Miss Rivera. "Remember, you just need to tell the truth," Miss Rivera told Thomas, kneeling down to his level. "The judge just wants to hear what happened in your own words." Thomas nodded solemnly. "I practiced with Dr. Barbara," he said. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. We sat in the front row behind Ms. Rivera's table. When they brought Wilson in, I felt Thomas tense beside me. I put my arm around his shoulders, reminding him that Wilson couldn't hurt him anymore. Wilson looked different in his orange jumpsuit, smaller somehow. He kept his eyes down, not looking at us or anyone else. His lawyer, a tired-looking man with a rumpled suit, whispered something to him as they sat down. The hearing itself was surprisingly quick. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, listened as Miss Rivera outlined the charges and presented some of the evidence they'd gathered. Wilson's lawyer didn't say much, just asked for more time to review the evidence, which the judge granted. Thomas didn't have to testify that day, which was a relief. The judge scheduled the actual trial for 3 months later, giving both sides time to prepare. As we were leaving, Wilson finally looked up and caught my eye. There was no remorse there, just cold hatred. I stared back until he looked away first. Outside the courthouse, Miss Rivera told us she was confident they had a strong case. With the physical evidence from his apartment, the testimony from multiple children, and now the assault charges, he's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. Those words should have made me feel better, but all I could think about was how close he'd come to hurting Thomas again, how he'd managed to find us at the cabin, how easily things could have gone differently. The next few months were a blur of preparations for the trial. Thomas continued therapy with Dr. Barbara, who helped him practice what he would say in court. I met with Miss Rivera several times to go over my testimony. Jessica helped us find a new apartment in a different school district, one with better security and a fresh start. We moved in about a month before the trial was set to begin. Thomas seemed excited about his new room, which we painted blue with dinosaur decals on the walls. He started making friends with some of the kids in the building, slowly coming out of the shell he'd retreated into after everything with Wilson. The night before the trial, I couldn't sleep. I kept going over everything in my head, worrying about how Thomas would handle seeing Wilson again, how I would handle it. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, I heard a small knock on my bedroom door. "Dad, are you awake?" Thomas's voice was small in the darkness. I sat up, turning on the bedside lamp. "Yeah, buddy. Can't sleep either?" He shook his head, clutching his dinosaur toy, Chompy, to his chest. "Can I stay with you tonight? I lifted the covers, and he climbed in beside me, his small body curling against mine like he used to do when he was younger. "Are you scared about tomorrow?" I asked. He nodded against my shoulder. "What if they don't believe me?" My heart broke a little at the fear in his voice. "They'll believe you, Thomas. You're just going to tell the truth, and the truth is powerful. Plus, you're not alone. There are other kids who are going to tell their stories too, and I'll be there the whole time. I promised, right in the front row where you can see me." He seemed satisfied with that and fell asleep pretty quickly. I lay awake a bit longer, watching his peaceful face and promising myself again that I would do whatever it took to protect him. The trial itself was harder than I expected. Seeing Wilson every day, listening to the details of what he'd done to Thomas and the other children, it was almost unbearable. But Thomas was incredible on the stand. He answered every question clearly, just like he'd practiced with Dr. Barbara. When Wilson's lawyer tried to confuse him or suggest he was making things up, Thomas stuck to his story. The other children were just as brave. One by one, they told similar stories about special time with Mr. Wilson in the supply closet, about being told they were special and that it was their secret. It was heartbreaking to hear, but also powerful. Together, their testimonies painted a clear picture of Wilson's pattern of abuse. When it was my turn to testify, I told the court about how I discovered what was happening, about confronting Wilson, about his threats and the attack at the cabin. Wilson's lawyer tried to suggest I'd overreacted, that I'd misunderstood what Thomas was saying, but I didn't budge. The trial lasted 2 weeks. By the end, I was emotionally exhausted, and I could tell Thomas was too. We spent the evenings watching his favorite movies and playing games, trying to keep things as normal as possible. Finally, it was time for the jury to deliberate. They were out for less than 3 hours before reaching a verdict. We all gathered back in the courtroom, the tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. When the jury foreman stood and announced guilty on all counts, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. Thomas squeezed my hand, a small smile on his face. Across the aisle, the parents of the other victims were hugging each other, some crying with relief. The judge sentenced Wilson to 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole for at least 20. As they led him away, he looked back at us one last time. I met his gaze steadily, letting him see that he hadn't broken us. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by the other families, reporters, and our supporters, Thomas tugged on my sleeve. "Is it really over now, Dad?" he asked. I knelt down to his level, looking him in the eye. "Yes, buddy. It's really over. Mr. Wilson is going to be in jail for a very long time." He thought about this for a moment, his face serious, then nodded once, decisively. "Good. Can we get ice cream?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Absolutely. I think we've earned it." As we walked away from the courthouse, Thomas's hand in mine, I realized we still had a long road ahead of us. There would be more therapy sessions, more nightmares, more healing to do. But for the first time, I felt confident that we would get through it together. That night, after Thomas was asleep, I sat on our new balcony with a beer, looking at the stars. Jessica called to check in, and I told her about the verdict, about how proud I was of Thomas. "You know," she said, "you're nothing like Dad. You're the father Thomas needs." I thought about that for a long time after we hung up, about how my own father would have handled this situation, how he probably would have told Thomas to just forget about it and move on, how he would have seen Thomas's trauma as weakness rather than the result of a terrible thing that happened to him. I made a silent promise to myself that night. I would keep working on expressing my own emotions, on being the kind of father who could help Thomas process his feelings in healthy ways. I would break the cycle that my father had started. 6 months later, Thomas started at his new school. He was nervous at first, but adjusted quickly, making friends and even joining the science club. He still saw Dr. Barbara once a week, but the nightmares had mostly stopped. Sometimes, he'd still crawl into my bed after a bad dream, but it was getting rarer. We were healing, both of us. It wasn't always easy, and there were still hard days, but watching Thomas laugh with his new friends, seeing him excited about learning again, made every difficult moment worth it. I know our story isn't over. There will be new challenges as Thomas grows up, new conversations to have, new ways I'll need to support him. But I'm ready for all of it because that's what being a parent is about. Being there no matter what, and figuring it out as you go.